Hello again, YouTube fam. So in the last video, I talked about what I thought God was sharing with me as far as tools for every new believer or old believer to have better intimacy with Jesus. So in the last video, I felt led to specifically talk about my experience with the baptism of the Holy Spirit and praying in tongues for the first time, and then how that changed over time, including that experience I had 6 years later. So in this video, I want to talk more specifically about the part that you heard in my prayer in the last video, which was actually hearing from Jesus for myself as an individual. So my first time experiencing something like that, I want to say it was around 2011, 2012. It was like a worship event, no particular church. I think it was just inviting young Christians from all around the area to come to like a worship night. And there was a moment where the person leading the worship took a break from the music part of it and invited us all to find our separate like prayer corner somewhere in this big room and ask Jesus a specific question and then wait to hear from him for an answer. And so I remember doing that, and I had like this notebook at the time. I took a lot of notes in church and stuff, so I wrote down what I felt was an answer that I got from him. And that was the first time trying to do something like that. And I don't think it was like, oh wow, this is clearly from God. It was more like, this is a good idea, whatever I just wrote down, and it just sounded good. And I was like, okay, that's probably about the best it gets. Well, fast forward to a few years later, when I started going to a sort of charismatic type of church where they practiced, speaking in tongues sometimes, and a lot of what they call prophecy, or just listening on someone else's behalf for God's voice. And they sort of demonstrated that in a few different ways. What I caught on to personally was getting like specific pictures that have symbolic spiritual meaning, and hearing words for people. So I got exposed to that a little more often during that season at this church. It was called Harbor in Pompano Beach, Florida. Just whether in prayer groups or whether in Sunday services, people would pray for me sometimes and get like these, images that had meaning. And sometimes share specific words. Maybe it was like one or two as like an emphasis, like God's working on, humility in this season, or I heard father issues for you, stuff like that. And so I got started practicing doing the same thing for other people, listening on other people's behalf for what God would show me. And I would get the same thing. I would get pictures, and I would get words like one or two at a time, to try to encourage people. And so I didn't really invest a whole lot in that afterward, but I did have some interesting experiences. One was I was at like a work event. It was a temporary job, and I worked with somebody, and then after the end of the shift, sorry, that plane is loud. After the end of the shift, I told him that I had prayed for him, and I told him what God had shared with me during my prayer. And so after I did that, he was like, wow, that's so crazy. That sounds almost exactly like a recurring dream I've been having. I'm like, wow, okay, so maybe I wasn't totally off base here, and he really appreciated me sharing that with him. And then another time I told someone kind of a prophetic vision that I had for them, and somebody that was in this vision, as long as the girl I was talking to and someone else was in this vision, and she said that was my brother. And I was like, okay, wow, again, 2 for 2. Maybe I kind of know how to do this a little bit. So then years later, I just decided out of nowhere, I guess I want to start doing this more often. I want to start praying and seeing, what God reveals to me prophetically. And this was also like a time of like serious isolation, not really being involved in church because I didn't really feel like I fit in anywhere at the time. I might get into that more in the next video, but basically, that's when I started, like I said, listening, hearing for, it's weird to say hearing, but basically waiting for God to give me visions, images, and hearing words. And then later on, it went from just like a few little short messages at a time, again, like the fuzziness that I talked about in the other video, to like sentences, to paragraphs, to long stretches of content that I felt like God was speaking to me directly. And so now I feel confident that anytime I have a question or anytime I want to, understand the topic more or just hear what God has to say to me to encourage me or help me through something or to say to someone else, that there's a lot of good content that comes out of that, and that it's usually pretty specific to the person. So I hope that helps. But then in this next video, I want to talk about something that is probably going to be a little difficult to talk about, but it's also what I think is a key aspect of building that intimacy with Jesus. So hope you have a great one.